This week, we are stepping into the practice of Sabbath. I think it helps to admit that Sabbath can feel both deeply appealing and surprisingly difficult. Most of us are tired. We know that we need rest, but when we actually try to stop, there's often something within us that resists.
That resistance makes sense. Many of us have been formed by environments where productivity is closely connected to identity. When we are accomplishing things, responding quickly, and carrying responsibility well, we feel secure and valuable. So when Sabbath invites us to cease from work, it can feel unsettling, as though something essential is being taken away.
Yeah, it can feel like we're stepping away from the very thing that proves that we matter.
And that is why Sabbath is not simply about physical rest or a biblical strategy for time management. It's theological. It is rooted in who God is and in how He designed human life to function.
In Genesis, God creates the world in 6 days and then rests on the seventh. Not because He's exhausted, but because the work is complete and it's good. His rest is an expression of His delight and His sovereignty.
And importantly, before sin enters the world, human beings are given both work and rest. In Genesis 2, Adam is placed in the garden to work and keep it. Work is not a punishment. It is part of God's good design. At the same time, the rhythm of creation includes Sabbath. From the beginning, humanity is called to live within a pattern of meaningful labor and intentional rest.
So both are good. Work is good, rest is good. The problem is not work itself. It is when the work becomes ultimate.
Exactly. After the fall, work becomes burdensome. It becomes entangled with striving and survival. And over time, it is easy for us to forget that we were not created for endless production. We were created for communion with God, which includes both purposeful activity and sacred rest.
That is such a helpful distinction. The Sabbath is not anti-work. It is about restoring our right relationship to our work.
Yes, it reorders our loves. In Exodus 20, when God commands Israel to keep the Sabbath, He roots the command in creation and God's own rest. Because God rests, we should rest.
Then in Deuteronomy 5, God roots the Sabbath in the Exodus, His redemption of His people. He says, "Remember that you were slaves in Egypt." Slavery meant unceasing labor. By giving Sabbath, God is teaching His people that they no longer belong to a system of relentless output. They belong to a God who rests and who gives His people rest.
And that remains deeply relevant for us. We may not be making bricks in Egypt, but we often live under quieter forms of compulsion. The pressure to achieve, to be constantly available, and to justify our place in the world.
And sometimes that pressure even sneaks into ministry. There's always one more call to return, always one more thing to improve. And these are good things, but if we let ourselves, we will always find one more thing to do. And those things can come to rule over us if we let them.
Which is precisely why Sabbath requires trust. When we intentionally stop, we are acknowledging that God is the one who ultimately sustains our lives and our communities. We are confessing that we are not indispensable and that the world does not depend on our work.
That is humbling in ways that are helpful and that are hard. It can be uncomfortable. When we cease from work, we may become aware of anxieties that we've been managing and hiding through busyness. Rest has a way of revealing what constant activity conceals.
I've noticed that as I've tried to fast from doing, and that is not a sign that Sabbath is failing. It may be evidence that it's working. The practice creates space to notice what has been shaping us internally. Rather than returning immediately to productivity, we can bring that restlessness into prayer. I'm a big fan of Jackie Hill Perry, and she caught my attention big time a few weeks ago when she shared a video about Mary and Martha. She noticed that in the culture and context of their lives, the tasks that Martha found herself distracted by were probably good tasks. Preparing a meal for guests in a culture defined by hospitality, hosting whoever else came to visit with Jesus, making space and arrangements for their stay. She was likely busy and stressed doing good things and wanted help from her sister to accomplish them. But she was so distracted by the tasks that she did not notice the more important thing. Jesus was near. How often do I, get distracted by the things that need doing and fail to notice that Jesus has come to visit? And if that isn't conviction, Martha then goes to Jesus and wants him to notice her doing the things. She asks him, "Don't you care?" Jesus told her that Mary had chosen what was better, which was to sit at Jesus' feet. Mary drew close to him and sat near to him. Sabbath gives us an opportunity to stop doing the things that can still be good and necessary in order to draw near.
That's so, so important. I think Jesus' words that the Sabbath was made for humanity, not humanity for the Sabbath, helps us see how he restores the Sabbath as a gift that God has given us.
Yes. Over time, Sabbath had become weighed down with layers of rigid interpretation. Jesus reminds his listeners that it was intended for human flourishing. It is not an additional burden, but a gracious provision.
And Jesus himself lived with those kinds of rhythms. He worked, taught, and healed, but he also regularly withdrew from the crowds and engaged in time of prayer and rest. There were always more people to heal or teach, but even when the crowds were waiting, he took a time apart with his Father.
That's so helpful for us, too. The needs around him were real and urgent, yet he regularly stepped away to pray and to rest in his Father's presence. His faithfulness included limits. That challenges the assumption that obedience requires constant availability.
Especially for those of us who feel responsible for holding things together, which I know applies to both of us.
Sabbath gently confronts that illusion. When we stop working for a set period of time, the world continues. God remains attentive and active. That realization can feel vulnerable at first, but ultimately it's liberating. So practically, how might someone begin stepping into this gift?
There can really be two parts to the Sabbath. First, we have to stop our work for a period of time, which sometimes involves preparing in advance so that you can truly step away from your usual work. And the second part is about taking time to delight in God. I've had some conversations with some members of the church about what Sabbath practice looked like for them when they were younger, and it did not sound delightful. It was rigid, and it was focused on making sure you didn't break the rules. But Sabbath, at its heart, is an opportunity to celebrate and enjoy God's good gifts and to let that celebration become a true act of worship.
Delighting in God during a Sabbath could include things like shared meals, unhurried conversation, time outdoors, worship, reading scripture, or simply resting physically. The aim is not to accomplish different tasks, but to cultivate receptivity. I like to connect with friends and family who live around the country and make FaceTime calls on Sunday afternoons. When the weather's nice, I also spend as much time outside as possible.
I love the idea of marking the beginning of your Sabbath time somehow, maybe with a simple prayer or lighting a candle, just something simple that sets that time apart.
That kind of intentional boundary can help shift our attention. And if a full day feels overwhelming, beginning with a smaller, consistent period is a faithful place to start.
And as you practice, notice what rises up in you. There may be resistance or relief or some combination of the two. Notice your joy and your discomfort and bring all of that before the Lord.
Sabbath is not about flawless observance. It's about remembering that we are creatures, not creators. We are beloved people invited to trust.
Work is a gift and rest is a gift, and both find their proper place when we receive them from the Lord's hand.
Absolutely. So this week, experiment with Sabbath, not as something to master, but as something to receive. Allow yourself to cease, to delight, and to trust that God is at work even when you are still.